This was really a labor of love, this whole project. I mean, from schematic design, client contact, everything. This project was perfect. The site was absolutely gorgeous. The client was very excited about all of the things that we were incorporating into the building, and it was just a phenomenal project. Some general stuff about the project. It's 216,000 square feet. The total construction cost, this is the bid cost, was about $32 million, which equates to about $145 a square foot. That's pretty low for a building like this. Typically, it's around $190 to $200 a square foot. OSFC co-funded this building, so there was money from the state and then local funding. So the state share was about 56%. Also incorporated into the budget was a House Bill 264 loan by West Milton from the state, and that basically funded some energy projects. And you pay back those loans with the money that you save by implementing some of these energy-saving and sustainable strategies. The site's 130 acres. Absolutely phenomenal site. I mean, you guys are more familiar with it probably than I am, but you've got magnificent athletic fields, beautiful woods. There was the old Christmas tree farm that is now, I believe, prairie. It's just absolutely phenomenal. One of the things that we did for this project, the state mandated that this be a LEED project. LEED is L-E-E-D. It stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's basically a rating system that is administered by a volunteer organization, which is called the United States Green Building Council, or USGBC, and it basically rates a building on how sustainable it is. Now this is, I know, a LEED Platinum plaque. We were shooting for Platinum. I was hoping, that would be appropriate for this project, but we got LEED Gold. We were very, very close to Platinum, which is the highest level of sustainability rating. The process really started with our eco-charrette, and this happened 6 years ago now. Basically, what we do is we get all the players in the room. We get community members, you get staff members, the design team, anybody who is remotely interested in the project. We get all into a room and we talk about the rating system and determine what the goals and strategies for that project are going to be. Part of that process also is once those goals and objectives have been established, we get our documents done based off of those goals, and then we review all those documents to make sure that the strategies are being properly implemented. So that was really the first piece of the process that got us to where we are. This is an aerial photograph during construction. Part of the initial, one of the first things you look at with a sustainable project is the orientation of the building. You want a fairly east-west orientation. This is Milton Potsdam along here, so we've got primarily east-west running the direction of the red roof. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're minimizing the amount of wall surface that faces the east and the west, because that's where you get the most heat gain from the sun. So you minimize that. You're, as the sun kind of goes overhead, the south walls actually don't get a lot of sun when you actually measure the angles. So that helps reduce the energy use. And along the lines of the energy use, the last time we measured it, actually after construction, the energy use was 95 cents a square foot. The ASHRAE standard right now is $1.41 a square foot. That's basically code minimum. Typical buildings of this size are using anywhere between $1.85 to $2 a square foot. Now Nathan's got some updated numbers that he can share with us about that. And why don't you tell us what
Yeah, so currently the building's actually at 90 cents a square foot, so energy use has been even trending further down. And also, Mike hasn't mentioned it yet, but there's renewables on site as well, solar PV and a wind turbine. And those have been producing right around 5% of the energy use for the building.
Yep. So, how we got there, other than the building orientation, the next thing you look at is the building envelope. The building envelope is the insulation in the walls, your doors, your windows, anything on the outside of that building. And what we did differently with this building is, in a traditional school building, you have what's called cavity insulation. And usually it's a rigid board that is just kind of slapped up against the wall, and it's friction fit between the masonry ties. Well, the problem with that is that you have a lot of gaps in that insulation. It's thin stuff, you know, it's about an R12 to 14, which is not too bad, but still, there's too many gaps in there, you get too many places for energy to escape. So what we did was we used this polyurethane foam insulation. It's a spray-on product. And what it is, it's a very high R value stuff that acts as your air barrier, which is very important, your vapor barrier, and your insulation. We sprayed this on to an aggregate thickness of about 2.5 inches, and we got about an R23, I think, out of the insulation alone, which really made the building very energy efficient. Now, we had some issues with this. This was, you know, the first project we did, polyurethane foam. So we went through a learning curve, and what we found is this product, as it expands, and it expands very rapidly after it comes out of the nozzle, it heats up to about 200 degrees, and then it rapidly cools. Well, as it cools, it also shrinks slightly. So what we were seeing is, at the base of every wall, you've got a piece of metal flashing that basically helps keep the moisture out of your building. What was happening is that was sticking to that flashing, and it was shrinking just enough that it peeled our flashing away from the building, which is a big problem. So we, you know, luckily we did this mock-up wall. We tested a number of different assemblies, and finally ended up with basically a piece of rigid insulation on the bottom of our walls to maintain our energy barrier, if you will. This is just one of the things, I brought this up as an example because this is one of the things we go through when we look at any kind of building. You know, we really get down into the details to make sure that the energy efficiency is there. Also, we sprayed it in the attic, and we've got basically about 4.5 to 5 inches of polyurethane foam on top of a drywall layer of our attic trusses. Now, this is a photograph during construction, and this is kind of after the roof is enclosed. And it is absolutely monolithic with the spray insulation that goes to the walls. We have a complete envelope of polyurethane foam insulation. Now, one of the fringe benefits of this is that we didn't anticipate the attic being occupiable at all. There's no equipment up there, there's no storage, no access, you know, to speak of. But what we found is after we sprayed the stuff on the bottom cord of the truss, you could actually walk on it. And I'm not supposed to say that because you're not supposed to do that. But it was tested by one of our mechanical engineers who was mechanical contractors who was a very large man. And I couldn't believe it when he was walking up there. Daylighting is a concept where you bring in the maximum amount of natural light into a classroom to try to minimize reliance on artificial lighting. This is an energy efficiency strategy. What we have is our east-west orientation. We have windows obviously on the north and the south, and we're relying on the south face to illuminate obviously the southern classrooms. But let me go to the next slide because that kind of describes the strategy itself. On the south side, and this is the left side of the slide is the south, we have solar shades. We've got our windows which are divided into two different areas. The windows above the solar shades are what's called our daylighting aperture. That's where most of the daylight actually comes through. Then below that is our vision aperture. Part of the LEED requirement is to have views to the outside, so we have to have windows that are, say, you know, between 18 to 24 inches above the floor and up. But another thing that we're doing inside the classrooms is that we are sloping the ceilings. So what happens is the light comes into the window, and the windows themselves have a certain kind of illumination. Like if you look at these windows over here, you know, they've got a certain amount of ambient light that's kind of, you know, going through those windows. And the ceiling actually is a fairly dark plane. But if you tilted that ceiling ever so slightly to those windows, it's just like, you know, tilting a piece of paper, you know, to those windows. It actually brightens up. And that's what we're doing. We're brightening up the ceiling to drive that light as far as we can back into the classrooms. The light fixtures themselves are also on photosensors. Now, they're on occupancy sensors. So what happens is someone enters the room, the lights turn on. If someone is vacant from the room or there's no one in that room for 15 or 20 minutes or so, the lights automatically turn off. And that's another energy saving feature. But what we're hoping to do is that we have enough natural light in the classrooms that people don't even think about turning the lights on. You know, that's really the first strategy you have beyond the occupancy sensors. This is a south face of the building. The white devices in front of the windows are the solar shades. They basically bounce light up into the daylight aperture into the classrooms. And then you can see they provide an additional benefit, which is shading the lower portion of the window. So that helps reduce the amount of heat gain in each one of the classes. And also, that's a PV array. It's a 32 kilowatt photovoltaic array. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. On the system side, we have high efficiency air-cooled chillers. Now, that's kind of a fancy term, but basically these are essentially traditional chillers. The difference is in how they're controlled. What our engineers discovered is that these chillers operate most efficiently at 60% of total capacity. So we have 3 of these chillers in this yard, and what happens is when there's a demand for air conditioning, the first chiller comes up to 60% and stops. Then the second chiller comes up to 60% and stops. And then the third chiller comes up to 60% and stops, if demand is there. If obviously demand is less than what those capacities are, then they don't either turn on chiller 2 and 3. But if demand goes above that, there's a controlled mechanism that actually allows the chillers to perform beyond their 60% capacity. Another thing we're doing with those chillers is we've got ice storage. So we are making ice during the night when your electricity rates are lower, and then during the day we are circulating a water glycol solution through these. There are like 12 of them. They're about 8 feet in diameter and about 10 feet tall containers that are back in that kind of chiller yard that's highlighted on the slide. And those are filled with ice. Basically, ice is made during the night, and then we use that ice to cool the building during the day. So you're actually taking advantage of a lower rate to cool the building. On another note, we actually looked at geothermal for this building, but for only a few percentage points less, we got the high efficiency air-cooled chillers and the added benefit of not having to spend about $1.5 million to drill 300 wells. I mean, a geothermal system would require 300 plus wells dug somewhere out on the site, and that was just $1.5 million that we thought was not worth that additional percentage. And we were able to do other things to the building, like put a PV array on and get terrazzo floors and do all kinds of cool stuff. One of the other things we're doing is solar hot water. This is a solar thermal system. So this is a in construction photograph. I'm sorry I don't have a more updated photograph, guys, but basically we've got 12 panels up on the roof, and we are circulating a water glycol solution through these panels to preheat water from the municipal supply. So water from a municipality is typically delivered at about 65 degrees. Well, our delivery temperature at the end of the faucets and in the kitchen is about 140 degrees. So what happens is we are tempering the water that's being delivered to the building. There's a traditional gas-fired boiler, but the water that goes into that boiler is the preheated water from the solar thermal system. So instead of natural gas heating up 65-degree water to 140 degrees, it's heating up 115 to 120 degree water to 140 degrees, because the amount of energy that it takes to change the temperature of water 40 degrees, no matter how hot or cold it is always the same. But if you're moving at 40 degrees, you're using a certain amount of gas. But if you're using it 80 degrees, you're using a lot more gas. So the solar thermal helps alleviate gas usage. One of my favorite aspects of the building is the rainwater harvesting system. We are actually using rainwater to flush all the toilets throughout the building. Now, this isn't necessarily an energy-saving strategy, because we do have to run the pumps to move that water to the toilets. But it is a sustainable strategy in terms of preserving water resources, and also a cost-saving strategy for the district, because they're not having to pay the water costs. Now, when we first started this project, Matt, I'm gonna rip on you a little bit. When we first started this project, the former village manager basically told us, well, there's no mechanism for us to meter the water coming out of that tank to get sewage costs. And we had a certain payback, for that. But, when we got into the project and it was, looked at again by the village, they said, well, we've got it. It was always the intention to actually meter that, so we actually had to put a meter, on that water. So if West Milton has a problem with their meter bill, Matt Klein is the man to talk to. So, sorry, Matt. Sorry. I probably just ruined any relationship I just had with you. So. Part of the rainwater system are the underground tanks. Now, traditional tanks for water are usually made out of concrete, but we did something different with this one. This is essentially a big hole in the ground with a rubber liner and gravel. And what you see, these big yellow chambers is basically a way to increase the volume in that gravel. So if you imagine a bag of marbles, and you take some of those marbles out and you put wiffle balls in there, the wiffle balls actually make the volume larger between the pebbles. And that's exactly what we're doing, because the water volume is actually between the rocks and within those storm protect chambers. It's about a 75,000 gallon capacity. This is what it looks like on the inside. I've been told that these next few slides kind of look like a colonoscopy, so take that for what it's worth. But this is what the inside looks like, and this is actually the clean side of the tank. And by the clean side, all the water for the rainwater system goes through rain gardens and then into an isolated system, an isolated chamber. That chamber is surrounded with filter fabric, so a lot of junk that would get past the rain gardens is actually filtered out by that black fabric. This is the dirty side of the tank, and this is actually a dirty tank, but the rest of the tank doesn't have that filter fabric on it. Now, I've got this picture in here because we had a problem with the tank. What was happening is the contractor who installed it really didn't understand what they were dealing with. Because what we were doing, the plan was to take water out of this side of the tank and put it right into the building. Well, during construction, they thought, well, heck, this is a sewer system. It's rained a lot. I've got a lot of muddy water on the side. I'm just going to pump it in, into my tank. Well, that's exactly what they did. They, for about 2 weeks, they pumped this dirty water in these tanks before anybody noticed. We made them clean it out, and this is the same tank. We actually made them go in there and vacuum all that dirt out. There's still some dirt in there, but it's settling out. But it was a big, long process. The first layer of filtration is our rain gardens. This is a picture that was taken about 2 to 3 weeks after initial planting. But what happens is all the water comes through the downspouts and into the rain gardens, and then that water is actually pre-filtered by the plantings. This is a photograph of it taken later this summer. We've got lots of growth, lots of color. Kids are using it to study insects and all kinds of things. But all that planting pre-filters that water, takes the solids out of the water before it gets to the rainwater tank. Now, on the inside of the building, we've got a 1,500 gallon tank. The pumps on the outside pump it into there. That 1,500 gallon tank then is chlorinated by an automatic chlorinator, and then it's delivered by those 3 kind of gold pumps through a 300 micron filter to the rest of the building. So there's basically 3 layers of filtration for this system. There's the rain gardens themselves, there's the isolator row, and then there's the 300 micron filter. And the only reason we have the 300 micron filter is to protect the flush valves on the inside. And of course, we've got our most sexiest element on the site, which is our wind turbine. The payback analysis for our wind time is not really there. I think right now the payback is about 77 years. That was the last time we calculated it. We're working on getting that down. And I think as performance kind of comes in, the payback is going to get better, but we'll see. But it's a proven unit. We chose it because the site here has got a certain wind resource, if you will. We did an extensive wind study to determine exactly what that resource was, and then we chose a turbine that matched that metric to maximize the amount of energy production. And it just happened to be that this Proven unit, which is a 15 kilowatt unit, was the right one. It's made in Scotland. And then I showed you a picture of our PV array. That is a 32 kilowatt solar array. And the performance of that is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, we couldn't have been happier. If I could have done anything differently on this project, I would have bagged the wind turbine and put more solar on the building because it's just performing beautifully. On the metering side, I mean, we're getting all this information. We have separated the building out into different areas, different zones. And we've got zones for the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school, as well as for the kitchen and what we're calling the shared services building, which is the gyms, the media center, and all the shared spaces. And I'm actually going to ask Nathan to kind of describe, some of that metering and what's involved.
Sure. Well, first, I apologize to the TV folks because I was standing right in front of the board for the first part of Mike's presentation, and also sorry for jumping the gun on the energy, renewable energy data. I just get so excited about it that I couldn't help myself. But yeah, so the sub-meters themselves, there's about 25 to 30 electric sub-meters, and about 20 BTU meters, which essentially is measuring the amount of heating or cooling going to the specific zones in the building. And so really what, as Larry mentioned, we're working with the district to, not only, design is a very important part of the building, but, if you're not utilizing the energy efficient technologies in the most opportune way, then you're losing out on potential savings. So that's really what we're working with the district to do. So, we're using all the electricity meters to, we're comparing them against each other. We've sat in meetings and shown, hey, we made this adjustment to the system, and now, we see this section of the building's energy use was here, now it's here. This energy use seems to be high on a weekend. Why is that? Are there gym lights being left on that aren't supposed to be on, and things like that.
That's a really good example because we had enough metering and enough monitoring of this building that the gym lights was actually they were being turned on from dawn to dusk in the building, and through the energy monitoring that we implemented, we were able to determine, hey, this is costing the school district so much money. Let's turn those lights off. Let's only use them during games, and stuff like that. Lighting is a huge cost for any building. Another thing we're doing, and Nathan chime in if you need, a lot of the corridor lights are on, for extended periods of time. Well, they're actually looking at, turning off particular banks during particular times of the day to save even more energy.
Yeah, we're that's actually in process right now. It should be done by October 11th, actually. So. But yeah, so what we're doing is originally the lights in the hallways ran, all the way through 11 or 12 o'clock when all the cleaning was completed. But after talking with the district and looking at some of the opportunities that were there, we figured there was a way to turn off a portion of those lights when students aren't there. It's still bright enough to move through the hallways without any danger, but it just to save energy there. Also, there's along the rain gardens, there's a very long hallway that's just north of the big gym, and it's daylight all day. And one of the ideas that was brought up was, hey, why do these lights need to go on if there's daylight in this hallway? So we installed a light sensor, and we're going to be controlling those lights to only be on if the light's at a certain level. And other than that, we'll have that light on daylight. So.
Yeah, WIBA was able to implement a very complex control system for all the systems. Another aspect of this is kind of an interactive piece. We've got energy displays out in the main lobbies that people can actually look to see what the building is doing on a day-to-day or moment-by-moment basis. It's got charts on how the building is performing based off of a baseline case. It's got charts on how the PV is, how much PV is being produced, water usage, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, just to sorry, I don't want to cut it off, but so we that was part of the controls piece of the project. So we are reporting all those types of statistics. A lot of those sub-meters we brought into there. We've also tried to do some educational slides, like Mike showed the daylighting with the shading that also was provided. So we kind of took some pictures of the shaded windows in the summer, and then in the winter the sun's lower in the winter, so all that light can get into the building.
And it's sophisticated enough that we've actually got a couple of slides that say, okay, well, with the energy that's being produced or saved, you can power, so many iPods, or, so many cars have been taken off the road in terms of CO2 emissions and stuff like that. And, on the metering of the schools, I don't know if you guys have implemented this yet, but we can actually have the schools compete against each other. So the middle school can compete against the high school and elementary school for energy savings. And maybe Jenny will give some kind of incentive at the end of the week or month, for whoever does best. But the payback analysis, this was done a number of years ago, based off of the House Bill 264 loan. I won't get into the numbers specifically, but basically, all of these energy efficiency strategies together, aggregate, have about less than a 5.5-year payback. That's the design case, and actually we're tracking very, very closely to what our design case is. So there is, a lot of savings to be made by implementing these strategies. Over the course of 25 years, that's $5 million that the school district won't be spending on operating their building because of some of that stuff. So I think that's pretty significant. We calculated about 63 cents, savings over a baseline case. We're exceeding that, with our 90% or 90 cents a square foot metric. That's basically it. It's a phenomenal building. It's one that people are actually visiting from all over the state and beyond. People are coming to Milton Union because they've got these systems, they've got the monitoring. People want to know how did this community do what you guys did. It's a testament, I think, to you and to your school board that all of these systems and just wonderful aspects of this building were implemented. So it's a phenomenal project. And at this point, I'll entertain any questions. That's a lot of info. Sorry, guys.
What's the projected life of the building?
That's a very good question. We kind of design our buildings for 100 years. That's basically what we do. It's an incredibly solid structure. It's all masonry with precast floor planks. It's not like bar joists and metal deck, which you could probably get 50 years out of that kind of construction without major renovations. But we think about 100 years.
I think back here. When the original insulation boom happened and they over-insulated living structures, you had a problem with stale air, bad interior. What are you doing now with all this insulation? How are you making sure there's good interior?
What they really discovered is that they were recirculating bad air, inside those buildings. And, people, we give off carbon dioxide and noxious stuff. Well, all that stuff is not really, getting out of the building. So the mechanical codes basically said, okay, well, you have to provide a certain amount of outside air into those buildings. So the envelopes, are not any less tight. In fact, they're getting tighter all the time. But what we're doing is we're actually controlling the amount of air that's getting into the building itself through the mechanical systems. So the energy saving part actually comes into play on the mechanical system side. Because if you just have, doors and windows and a couple of units that, are recirculating bad air, you're going to get a very stale environment. And that's definitely not what you want. You may save a lot of energy, but you're not going to have, anybody in that building because it's going to smell, horrible. But it's on the mechanical side where the fresh air comes in. Because now we have to have like 100% outside air to exchange. And I can't remember exactly what the rate is. It's like
there's significant outside air brought in through the air handling units. But part of the energy saving piece that Mike's talking about is that rather than air leaking in where you don't want it to, that can cause cold drafts. You focus all of that outside air in the air handlers, and the majority of the air handlers, if not all, have what are called energy recovery wheels in them, which essentially the outside air is preconditioned by exhaust air, and you kind of recover some of that energy from that
heat exchanger.
Heat exchanger in the air handling units themselves that save energy there rather than just having to heat your pool from 0 to 70. So.
Right.
There are carbon dioxide sensors throughout the HVAC system, so if they sense a high carbon dioxide level in the room or the gym, then that directs the system to open up and bring more outside. So that's all.
Yep.
Mike, is it, I forget, 2 or 3 times every 24 hours it has to bring in 100% fresh air?
I can't remember the rate, but that sounds about right. Yeah.
With all the technology involved in this, is there anyone in maintenance at the school that's going to take special training to be able to service these things? And so we don't have to call outside contractors every time it burps?
Well, I think there's two parts to that. Yes, there are staff members that are being trained on the control system, but also the district has a contract with Weibel to help that staff manage that system. And I don't know, Chuck, if you want to kind of chime in.
That's exactly right. And the other thing I would say is that when we were in the old building, we also had outside contractors that came and worked on the boilers and so it's not really unusual. They're helping us with preventive maintenance. And really, this system is extremely complicated. Having people that have that basic knowledge, I'm not sure how long it took our guys to gain knowledge of some of the things.
Yeah, and we, we've talked to the districts too, we've done a lot of training already. We're happy to provide as much training as is needed to get all the guys to the level they need to be. I mean, even some of the rainwater stuff, we haven't done much with that at all either, so, there's.
But we have guys, if there's something on